Hey everybody, in this episode we follow the posture of experimentation as we try out a solo episode where I dive into one specific concept. So in this episode we'll explore the concept of learning agility together, and I'll explain why I think this is the ultimate competitive advantage for our modern world of work. We'll answer the questions: what is learning agility? Why does it matter? And then I'll share 3 practical tips for developing your own learning agility. So, without further ado, here's my episode exploring a bit of an overview on the concept of learning agility. All right, welcome to the Building Thinkers podcast. Today, I'm so delighted to be joined by myself. So in the spirit of the posture of experimentation, we're going to try out the structure of a solo episode where we will explore one concept or idea, really explaining what it is, why it matters, and then I'll share some practical tips for implementing that concept in our context. And we'll just see how this feels and what y'all think and if we should do any more of these. So in case this is the first episode that you've listened to, welcome. I'm so glad that you're listening and or watching. My name is Tracy Clark, and I am a learning experience designer and strategic consultant in the learning and development space. And I love helping social impact organizations design and facilitate learning experiences. And these learning experiences are ones that are full of joy and creativity, rooted in research, and ideally experienced in community. And so on this podcast, I typically interview professionals that are in all different industries, and we explore their career pathways and what brought them to the work they're doing today. And we also dive into their "if only people knew" statements when it comes to their industry or specialty. So today we're going to do something, like I mentioned, a little bit different. We're going to explore one concept, and today we're going to explore the concept of learning agility and figure out what is this, why does it matter, and what are some practical ways to start to develop and apply it. And so let's get right to it. What is learning agility? So this term, learning agility, was popularized by the researchers Lombardo and Eckinger in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And when they talked about learning agility, they were speaking to this ability and willingness to quickly learn and adapt in new or unfamiliar situations. Anyone out there in any new and unfamiliar situations? Anyone facing some uncertainty in your organization, in your business, in your life? Okay, yeah, me too, but we'll come back to that. And actually, we're going to go back in time to build on this concept. It was Alvin Toffler who said in 1970, he said, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." And while I have some issue with the fact that we're not yet, he was assuming we would have eradicated illiteracy by this time. But while we haven't made the progress there, he was spot on in speaking to this ability to learn and unlearn and relearn. And I think it's exactly that, this learning, unlearning, and relearning. That's this learning agility. And I think it's the ultimate competitive advantage, both as an individual and as a collective team and organization, because learning agility as a lifelong habit, it means you can always get unstuck. Whether it's making specific progress on some specific skills and competencies, or maybe it's helping your team move forward on a stalled project, or gaining the strategic clarity you need to lead your whole department with a centered confidence, even when we're in the midst of uncertain and continually dynamically changing times. And this idea of learning agility, it's one of those ideas that's kept chasing me. And I love to reflect. And in reflecting on my own life, I started to really identify my own story of learning and what mindsets and skills and behaviors had I learned. And then reflecting on how did I learn them. In some cases, it was intentional. In other cases, it was dropped into some situation in which I had to learn. And I looked back on those. And one of the things I realized in a series of these types of reflections was that I had figured out how to close the gap between what I could do at that time and what I next wanted to do. That closing of the gap, that's learning agility. And so now when I think about learning agility, the type that we really need to nurture and possess to thrive in our modern work world, I think it is this, yes, knowing how to learn, but it's also how to figure out what to learn next. And it's also the figuring out what needs to be unlearned or relearned, and then knowing how to apply that learning to make an impact in whatever you're pursuing. And so it's these concepts that have driven me to create learning experiences around learning agility and this idea of how do we build modern learning habits that help us as individuals and can also be applied across an organization to help get at that exponential power that is in us as humans. I love the quote and often share from Todd Rose' End of Average that human potential is nowhere near as limited as the systems that we've put in place assume. And I think it's from that rooting recognition that we have neuroplasticity, that we can grow and change, that we can think in new ways, that we can unlearn and relearn. That drives me to be so interested in this concept and want to help myself continue to develop learning agility and others. And so a couple ways, let's get practical now. And, I think this might be a concept we'll come back around to. Maybe we can do more episodes on some of the specific steps. But if you're just wanting to get started and you're like, okay, I get it. Learning agility. I recognize there are these things I know I need to learn to maybe upskill in my career, or there is a gap between where I am and what I next want to do. And I'm stuck in this place of, I can envision that. I can even almost taste and feel that next thing I want to do, but I'm not really sure how to get there. And I don't really know if it's mindsets or skills or, what it is that'll help me to get there. I have a couple ideas on where we can start. One is this idea, if this resonates with you, of creating a learning history or a learning map. I literally did this. If you follow me, you might have seen I like to sketch note and draw out pictures and referencing different concepts. And so I did this with my own history of learning. What were the things that I really wanted to do that were goals, and how did I get there in achieving those? And so I started way back I wanted to play Division I lacrosse in college. Well, first of all, I just wanted to play lacrosse in college, but there was a pretty big gap because I was living in a state and an area at that time that didn't even have girls lacrosse until high school. And so I reflected on how I ended up learning to play lacrosse and ultimately did get an opportunity to play Division I lacrosse at the University of Richmond in Virginia, and what it took to learn that skill and to decide to put in the time and sweat and effort and tears and probably some blood along the way to get to that place. And so I carried on from there in how did I learn Spanish? How did I learn user experience design and learning experience design and strategic consulting? Name any of the skills that now I am continuing to develop and have developed. I started to see in this map the different ways that came about. And one of the recognitions that I had is as a recovering perfectionist, it is really important that I don't stay stuck in the book learning, in the research learning. I love diving into research and books and all of the authors and thought leaders on these topics. But I recognize I could stay there if I don't force myself into application, experimentation, and trying new things. It's what drove me to start this podcast, to ship something out there to the world that I know isn't perfect, I know isn't quite done yet in the extent that I would love for it to be, but it is this very shipping and sharing that is helping me to work on this recovering perfectionism. So as I looked at my own learning history and my map of learning, I realized that these experiences in which I almost didn't have any other choice, once I chose to go to a rural part of Mexico and teach in the public schools there, I did not really have a choice to speak English while I was there. I mostly spoke Spanish, and that's where I got really comfortable and confident and was able to come back and be a bilingual teacher following that experience. And then again, in my early 20s, I became part of a team that was working on an ed tech app, and we kind of stumbled into it. And I became an accidental CEO and co-founder of this ed tech app. And so we figured all the pieces out. We figured out how to do the user experience design. We figured out how to start a help desk and answer all these help desk tickets that were coming in, because we were running the whole thing off of a Mac Mini, which now we recognize was not the best solution. But at that time, we learned by trying and doing, and having an incredible team around that allowed for that to happen. Same thing, fast forwarding to learning over the last 9 years, how to be a strategic consultant, how to really dive deep into learning experience design. Again, surrounded by an incredible team and mentors and people to learn from who were already high quality strategic consultants. It is this immersion into doing the work and continuing to learn, continuing to read and research, listen to podcasts, take courses. When it comes to learning, it's both the input, yes, the things we read and consume and listen to and explore and research, and it's the output. It's what we do with them. It's how we make them our own. It's the insights that we add. It's the experience that we make again into our own. It's the writing the blog post. It's the publishing the podcast. It's the conversation, even walking with a friend, distilling a concept and explaining it in new ways that allows us to get at learning. So if learning was an equation, we could think about input plus output, doing something with it, applying it. And if we're imagining this formula, it's raised to the power of feedback. If we want to get to exponential learning and growth, we have to put it out there and ask for some feedback. Ask for the market to give you feedback, friends to give you feedback, whatever it is. And so as we develop learning agility, this is one idea, this learning history and map. Okay, the second idea to develop learning agility is to get clear and identify your learning priority. We know that we're living in a time with a wealth of information, but a poverty of attention. And so when we specifically are talking about learning agility, it can be very challenging to make a clear, concerted effort towards something without having that priority clarified from the beginning. So we're bombarded every day by another post on LinkedIn, another research article. Ooh, now there's a new set of research and we want what's most current. And now we need to compare that with the research from last month. And there is never ending amount of information that we as humans are now consuming. So we can develop learning agility by getting clear on our learning priority. The story I love to tell around this comes from Greg McKeown's Essentialism, where he talks about the origin of the word priority. So the word priority was originally in the 1400s singular. I'm just going to let that sink in for a moment. The word priority was singular originally. Makes sense. It meant the very first or prior thing, right? And it wasn't till the 1900s, Industrial Revolution, where it became pluralized. And he says, as if we could, bend reality by changing the term to priorities. So when it comes to learning agility, we have to start with a clear learning priority. And so if we're not clear first and filter all that noise by our learning priority, it'll be really challenging to make progress and have this learning agility to move forward. So there are 3 questions that in the learning experience that I offer around growing learning agility and building a modern learning habit, we have an activity where we explore these 3 questions, thinking about analyzing our learning priority against necessity, feasibility, and curiosity. So you can start with, if you like to journal or reflect or draw on your iPad, whatever it is, you could start with these 3 questions to start to analyze your learning priority. Think about if something's coming to you as a learning priority, something you need to learn. Think about the necessity of it. What impact will that learning priority make? Start to think about what impact it might make in your personal and professional life. What projects are you working on right now where this learning priority would help you move forward? The next is feasibility. So we start with necessity, what impact will it make? Then feasibility, how much effort will it take? So sometimes when we're trying to learn something new, we don't really think about this piece, and therefore we don't design our own learning plan with this in mind. So how much effort will it take? There's a huge distinction in what it might take to learn a language versus learning a specific one research concept and applying it into your work. So how much effort will it take? This is so important for us to consider when we're setting out with a new learning priority. And then finally, curiosity. Why do you care? What's your natural motivation towards this topic? Is it one of those things that you're constantly thinking about and you know that maybe your life's work is around one of these concepts that you need to make some progress on in terms of learning? Why do you care? And this is going to have some connection to what impact will it make? Okay. The third idea for how we can get started in developing learning agility is exploring something called a skills taxonomy. Okay, this is just a list of specific skills, and in organizations, these are often specific skills that are aligned to business needs. And so if you work within an organization or you have maybe an HR leader or a learning and development leader that you could go to and ask for access to this skills taxonomy, or go to whoever you directly report to and ask for some of the specific skills that perhaps they think you could start to grow to move forward in your career or move forward in a project or whatever your goal is right now. And so this idea of skills taxonomy may be something worth exploring if you want to get really concrete and specific about what some skills are that you may want to start with and explore. You could take those skills from the taxonomy and start to do that mapping of what impact will it make, how much effort will it take, and why do you care? Over time, I'd love to put together some resources around this, pull some things from the learning experiences that I've offered and share them with you all. If you have any interest in any of that, feel free to reach out. There's a ton of ways to get in touch now. I'll include the Building Thinkers link tree in this episode description, and that will have all the stuff that I'm working on and sharing over time. I am also now offering a workshop specific to how do we build learning agility and going through some of these activities that we've talked about today and several others. And hopefully coming in the not too distant future, there will be an opportunity for individuals to also go through a learning experience. I'm working on really refining that and prototyping that and hope to be offering that to you all soon. I'm going to leave you with 3 books that are connected to this topic of learning agility that I found to be really helpful in growing my thinking around it. And the first is Charles Duhigg, The Power of Habit, the way in which he explains and unpacks the habit loop itself with a ton of examples. is really powerful in thinking about how we might establish learning habits. Melding that science of the power of habit with also how we learn has really helped push my thinking in that area and help me establish some of my own, what he refers to as keystone habits, these habits that are almost like dominoes. With when we address, oftentimes health is a keystone habit, and some changes around that will impact other choices that we might make. Book number 2 is Greg McKeown's Essentialism. I referenced that when we were talking about the story of the word priority. I think this book has really helped me think about, when it comes to these concepts of learning agility, what we choose to prioritize, how we choose to quiet the rest of the noise, and stay laser focused on what really matters to the work we're doing at this time. And then the third book is from Boaler, Limitless Mind. And she does such an amazing exploration of the neuroscience, neuroplasticity, some connections to growth mindset, and some of the conversations that she's even had with Carol Dweck about the concepts of growth mindset, where it's misunderstood, and some of the ways that we can think. I love any books that dive into the research and science and then push on the way we think about these concepts, I find really powerful. All right, I hope this episode has been helpful for you all, and I'd love to hear from you. If you are wrestling with something that you are trying to learn and you're frustrated with the progress that you're making on it, or if you're recognizing the need to upskill in your career, or maybe if you're just frustrated with kind of this gap between the vision of where you know you could be and where you are right now, reach out, and I'd love to hear more about what you're thinking about and share any of the things that have helped in my own journey. So thank you all, and look forward to seeing you and talking with you next time. Thanks so much for listening to the Building Thinkers podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a podcast rating and review. That helps more listeners find us in the world of podcasting algorithms. You can find out more about my learning and development strategy services at buildingthinkers.com. And remember, there's no limit to what you can learn.